Thank you for joining me for another video. Last week we began chapter 10 of the book of Genesis, and in chapter 10 so far we have covered the genealogy of Japheth, who was there's some disagreement as to the order that the three sons of Noah were born. One opinion is that Japheth was the firstborn. Another opinion was that he was the third. So, I don't know, make of that what you will. What is interesting, though, is that everyone agrees that Ham is in the middle in terms of, birth order. So I think that that's very interesting. So there's one opinion that says that Japheth was the first, mostly comes from this particular passage, chapter 10, where it gets into the descendants of each of the sons of Noah, and it gets into where they kind of scattered. And again, I mentioned last week very briefly, so I'll make sure to mention it more in depth this week. These are not necessarily individuals, okay? Every single, as a matter of fact, the majority of the people that we're going to talk about this week, their names are actually plural endings, which tells me we're not talking about individuals, we're probably talking about an entire tribe. And that really makes a lot of sense, because while you can't necessarily, thousands and thousands of years ago, trace it back to a single individual where this single individual moved, you can trace tribes, where they moved and everything. And so last week we discussed Japheth's descendants, the tribes, the nations, if you will, who descended from him. This week we're going to get into the descendants of Ham. And one more thing before I continue, just so that I make sure that I remember to say it. Just because we say that these tribes or even individuals are descended from a particular son of Noah, that doesn't necessarily mean we're talking in terms of a father-son relationship. This may be that there are passages in the Tanakh, I'm just giving you the example before I say it outright, where the prophets in the School of Prophets, which is an academy for training Israelites to receive and understand prophetic inspiration, doesn't necessarily mean that they always received it or that they always understood it, but there was such a school that existed at one point. Those students at that academy were called Bnei HaNevi'im, the sons or the children of the prophets. Doesn't necessarily mean that they were literally their sons. It may have very well just meant that these were those who were heavily influenced. Okay, so in the case of Japheth, the tribes that we mentioned last week were not necessarily descended from Japheth, but they were influenced heavily by Japheth and by his descendants. So, now that I've said all of that, let's go ahead and jump into it. We're going to be reading a lot today. Going to be reading verses 6 through 20. Go back to verse 6. Okay. So here we go. Verse 6. Uvnei Ham, the children of Ham, Cush, Umisraim, Ufuth, Uchna'an. So it tells us that the sons, or the perhaps disciples would be a good word, but for sure we're talking about descendants, either physically or metaphorically, of Ham, where Cush, Mitzrayim, and Put, and Canaan, or Canaan, I think he's called in English. Verse 7, Uvnei Cush, the sons of Cush, Sava, Wahawila, Wasavtaqa, no, Wasavta, Waraqama, Wasavtaqa, now I get to say this one. Uvnei Ra'ama, Shva Udadan. So the sons of Cush were Sava, or perhaps Seba, or maybe Sheba, not Sheba, Seba in English. Honestly, I don't know. Read your translation, and however you want to say it, that's the way we're saying it today. The sons of Cush were Sava and Hawilah, and Savta, and Ra'ama, and Savtecha, or Savteka, I think is how a lot of English translations will transliterate that. And the children of Ra'ama were Sheva, or Sheba, I think is how it's said in English, and Dedan. Well, Cush yalad et Nimrod. And Cush, he fathered Nimrod. Again, doesn't necessarily mean that he was the literal father. It could just mean that he was a teacher or a primary influence on his life. Who hahel lihiyot gibor ba'aretz, and he, Nimrod, was the first. Okay, so it doesn't say first. Most English translations say first, but we're going to translate it as first as well. He was the first to be a great man, or a hero on the earth, perhaps. What does this one say? A mighty man on the earth. Hu haya gibor sayid lifnei Hashem. Al ken. Alken Yamar Kinimrod Gibor Said Lifnei Hashem. So it says that he, Nimrod again, was a heroic hunter, or perhaps a great hunter, a mighty hunter, before Hashem. Therefore, it's said, like Nimrod, this great hunter, this mighty hunter, this heroic hunter before Hashem. Uti Reshit Malchutho Bavel Wa'erech Wa'akad Wa'chalne Ba'aresh Shin'ar. So it says that the beginning of his kingdom was from Bavel, from Erech, both of which we've encountered before, or at least I've spoken about before, but we'll get more into that later. From Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, that would be the Akkadian Empire, in case you were curious there. And Kalne in the land of Shinar. So this is all in the land of Shinar, which is the general region of the Persian Gulf. That would be in the south of Iraq, between the two rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris, the Khidikel. So between the two great rivers, that region. Some might even call that southern Mesopotamia. We are in verse 11. Min ha'aretz hahi yasa Ashur vayiven et Nineveh ve'et Rehovoth ir yeah, with Rehovot Ir, with Kalah. Kalah. So he, it says that from this land, or that land rather, went forth Ashur, who, it says that he built Nineveh, the city of Nineveh, and Rehoboth Ir, which is probably best translated as the surrounding cities. But in this translation, it is the proper name of the city. And Kalah, verse 12, with Resen ben. Sorry, my lettering on this page is worn down. It's like a 20-year-old Tanakh, so not only do I have to deal with, smaller lettering, and I'm getting older now. I turned 40 at the end of this month, but now I've got smudged letters, and I need to get a new one. I really do. Where was I? 12, yeah. With Resen ben Ninue uven Kalah he ha'ir ha'gedolah. So it says that Resen, which apparently is between Nineveh and Kalah. Then it says the great city. We're not sure which city it is that it says is the great city. It could be, it's probably not Resen. It's probably Nineveh, but it could also be Kalah. Misraim, the text goes back to naming the descendants here. First we named off the descendants of Cush, now we're naming off the descendants of Misraim. Misraim Yalad eth Ludim, ve'eth Anamim, ve'eth Lahavim, ve'eth Naftuchim. So the it says that Misraim he fathered. Again, doesn't have to be literal. It could be, in the sense that he just had an influence on these. These are absolutely tribes. These tribes are called Ludim and Anamim and Lahavim and Naftuchim. We'eth, verse 14, We'eth Pathrusim, We'eth Kasluchim, Asher Yasu Misham Pelishtim, We'eth Kaftorim. So it tells us here that also, in addition to those that it named, also the Pathrusim and the Kasluchim, and from them, it says, or from Asher Yasau Misham, who left from there, the Philistines. The Philistines are the ones who left from there, from, just lost my place, man, from Kasluchim, the Philistines and the Kaftorim. Verse, what is this, 15? Uchnaan, and it goes on to the descendants of Canaan now. Uchnaan Yalad eth Sidon, Bechoro with Heth. So it tells us that, and Canaan fathered Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, with, verse 16, with Hayevusi, with Hayamori, with Hagirgashi. That would be the Jebusite, the Amorite, and the Girgashite, with I had that problem last time I was in Guatemala as well. I would go to translate something from English into Spanish, and I would look at the guy, and say to him in English whatever it was I was trying to translate, and then he would, then I would catch myself, and I would translate it to Spanish, then he would respond in Spanish, and I'd repeat the Spanish. It's, telling you, man, sometimes. You ever wonder if maybe there's just like, your head can only hold so much knowledge, and then just like, before it just vomits it everywhere? Completely lost my place. Give me just a second. Here we go. With Hahiwi, with Ha'arqi, with Hasini. So the Hivite, the Archite, and the Sinite, or Sinite maybe. I don't know how they say it in English. With, and most of us don't. Most of you don't, because I mean, who says that word? Who says it really? With Ha'arwadi, with Azamari, with Hamathi, Wa'ahar, Nifusu Mishpochot Ha'knagani. So it tells us that the Arvadite, or the Arwadite, depends on, obviously, pronunciation, how you pronounce that letter Woe, and the Zemarite, I don't know how you would say that in English either, and the Hamathite, and after the families of the Canaanites, they branched out. Verse, what is this, 19? Verse 19, Wayhi Gvul HaKadani Misidon Bo'acha Garar Ad Azza Wa'acha Bo'acha, there we go, Bo'acha Sdoma Wa'gamorra Wa'adma Wa'savoim Ad Lasha. So here it's giving us a little bit of geography here. It says that the border of the Canaanite was from Sidon to going toward Gerar as far as Gaza, going toward Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim as far as Lasha. And verse 20, Ele v'necham l'mishpochotham l'lishonotham ba'arsotham ba'goyehem. So it tells us that these are the descendants of Ham by their families and their languages. I'm adding the word "and" by their families, their languages, in their lands, in their nations. So there is a lot going on in those, 15-ish verses? There's a lot going on. So let's talk about it. A lot of the groups here are just that. They're groups, they're tribes. Okay, these are not individuals. These are tribes who just sort of branched out from there. And frankly, I think that the overwhelming majority of it is really very interesting. If you notice, this is just kind of a random thought that I just now had. But if you notice, it tells us that there were 4 sons. Excuse me, I'm recovering from a cold and my throat's a little bit raw. So if I don't quite sound like I normally do, that's probably why. Excuse me. So you notice the text gives us 4 sons of Ham, but only tells us about descendants of 3 of those sons. It leaves out Phut completely. I'm not 100% sure what that means, but I assume it means that they were so far away that it wasn't really an issue for the ancient Israelites, and so Hashem decided maybe I should not put all of their divisions into my book. So, I don't know. So I've got my glasses on because I am going to be reading quite a bit from my notes, because bunch of names, I got to remember where they all are. I mean, I know generally where they all are, but I got to remember where they all are, so I wrote them down. So the very first one we're going to talk about is Cush. Okay, we've talked about Cush before. Cush is traditionally the, let's say, founder of what we now call Ethiopia, Somalia, Somaliland, Djibouti, Eritrea, parts of Sudan, that region, that's where his descendants went to. They may have actually spread from where they were after the flood. Okay, so this is back in Mesopotamia. They may have actually spread to the east a little bit into the Indus Valley. There's one opinion out there. This is a non-rabbinical opinion. Okay, this is from somebody who's a scholar in the field who supposes that perhaps Cush, he spawned the Indus Valley civilization in what is now India. I don't know about that, but honestly it does make sense, okay, because we know that a lot of these ancient civilizations in that area had contact with each other, okay? So it really wouldn't make too much sense for it to, for them to have at least not known each other. And it really does, excuse me, it really does make a lot of sense if Cush had a lot of dealings with the tribes in the Indus Valley, and perhaps rather than being physical descendants of him, they were just heavily influenced by whatever technology or whatever culture he may have had. Okay. Now, David Rohl, who I've mentioned before, is a biblical scholar who I think that, and he's not Jewish, he's, if I remember correctly, he's an agnostic, but who was raised Christian. But I think that his books are really quite illuminating. He's an archaeologist, specializes in Egyptology. However, he's noticed that in dealing with the archaeology of Egypt, he has to address Mesopotamian and Levantine archaeology as well. And he's noticed that really there are a lot of archaeological facts supporting the scriptural account. So if you get a chance, you've got a little bit of money to spend on books, you enjoy reading, that sort of thing, check out David Rohl. His last name is R-O-H-L. Check him out. Check out his books. A good one that I think summarizes the majority of some of his earlier works, although his earlier works are also phenomenal because he walks you through his whole thought process. He walks you through how he came to discover certain things, why he decided on certain things over other things. He really does a fantastic job of reconstructing the history and interpreting it, in my opinion. But a good book that sort of summarizes those earlier books is his book From Eden to Exile, which follows from Adam to the exile of the Jewish people. And by the Jewish people specifically, I'm referring to the southern kingdom of Judah. Really fascinating work, really very informative work. And I think that, I don't necessarily agree with him about everything, but I think that on most things he's dead on. In my opinion, nothing else makes any sense. So, there's my shameless plug for a man I've never met, who's not paying me, by the way. He's not paying me to endorse his books, but I do endorse his books. At the very least, it'll give you a different perspective, perhaps from what you were raised believing. He has identified the historical Cush, okay, historical meaning the individual that the Torah gets the name Cush from, as the Mesopotamian king Meskiag Kasher, who was the son of the sun god Utu. And I really, really like that identification because it answers a whole lot of questions that I would otherwise have. Now, the Sumerian Kings List tells us that Meskiag Kasher went down into the sea and he came out at the mountains, which Roll interprets as meaning that he boarded a ship, either he himself or an expedition that he sent out, boarded a ship at the sea and came up in a mountainous land, specifically the mountainous land of the Upper Nile region, which is exactly where biblical Cush is. So that, that's you might think maybe that's a little bit too neat, and it kind of is, but you do the research on it. I'm not going to tell you what to believe, just you do the research on it. Now you might be thinking to yourself, but Utu is the father of Meskiag Kasher, and we know that Ham is the father of Cush. Ham, you may think to yourself, okay, maybe, you got Meskiag Kasher, okay, that's where we get Cush. But where do we get Ham from Utu, right? Well, as it happens, Utu is an Eastern Semitic form of the Western Semitic word Hamma, which means sun. Both words mean sun. Okay, Hamma is one of the words for sun in Hebrew, because Hebrew, again, it's a Western Semitic language. It's a Northwestern Semitic language, and if we say that this Utu is Ham, then we derive it from Hamma. Hamma, of course, being one of the words for the sun, another one being Shemesh. Ham, the name Ham, means hot or burnt. Okay, so when we say that his name was Ham, we're probably not talking about his actual name here. We're probably talking about what the Torah is calling him. Maybe his name was similar, but we're probably not talking about what his mom and dad called him, for lack of a better term. Okay, so it is a shortened form of Hamma. It looks like the Torah may be mocking Ham by calling him Ham. It gives Yefeth, it gives him a beautiful name. The name means beautiful, or it means extended, or broadened. Shem, the name Shem means name. Okay, it means referring. Traditionally, we say that it refers to the name of God, but it's not important right now, anyway. But it appears that the Torah is mocking Ham as if to say, oh, he claimed that he was the god of the sun, but really he's just a hothead. That's the idea that we're getting at. So if it was right that Meskiag Kasher is the origin of the Cushites in Africa, because Cush and Meskiag Kasher are the same guy. Mizraim, another son of Ham. Everybody agrees, there's no disagreement, there are no parallel opinions. Mizraim is Egypt, okay? And it refers to, even today, it's the word for Egypt in Hebrew. Fourth, we're talking about the coastal region to the southeast of Cush and Egypt. This is modern-day Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, Somalia, Somaliland, and Djibouti, possibly also on the far side, by far side here on the western side of Egypt into Libya, that area. Okay, Canaan, obviously the Canaanite peoples of the Levant. So we're talking Israel, we're talking Jordan, we're talking Lebanon, we're talking Syria. So the Canaanite populations there. We're going to get into individual groups later. Okay, we're going to get into them now. How about that? Zerah is traditionally located in, sorry about that, hiding my face scratch. It is traditionally located in southern Arabia, possibly also across the sea in Africa. So we're talking about imagine the Arabian Peninsula. Okay, so you've got both sides of it have contact with each other, both sides of the not the Arabian Peninsula, but the sea there. Now we call it the Red Sea. It wasn't always called that, but now we call it that. Perhaps the Arabian Sea is a better name for it. Actually, I don't think we call it the Red Sea anymore. I think we call it the Arabian Sea today. But there was a lot of contact between tribes on both sides of that water, and so you see that, and you're going to see anyway, that you might have a civilization with its capital in Arabia, but it also has territory in Africa. So that's cool. It's, you try to go across land, it's going to take you months. You go across the sea, okay, so what? Maybe a day or two? It's nice. So Hawilah is, this is not the same Hawilah as earlier in Genesis, the one that is connected to the land of Eden. It's possibly in Arabia, possibly across the sea in Africa again. There is an opinion out there that it's as far east as Tibet. There's exactly one person out there who, one scholar anyway that I found, who says that. He's not a rabbinical scholar, not that that matters, but that opinion is out there. I don't know that I'd go so far as making that identification, but he did, so it is what it is. Notably, in Somalia and Somaliland, there is a clan that might preserve the last vestige of that name, Hawilah, and that is the Hawiye clan. By the way, if you are Somali and you're from that clan, please, get a hold of me. I would love to hear your thoughts about that. Not that I have a huge following, or a huge following in Africa for that matter, but, somebody might see it. Sabta. So this is likely one of those civilizations that was both in Arabia and across the sea in Africa. Ra'amah, this is in Yemen, southern Yemen, what is now Yemen. Sabtecha is traditionally put in modern-day Somalia and Somaliland. Sheba is absolutely in modern-day Yemen, with some of that kingdom across the sea in what is now Ethiopia and Eritrea. Dedan was on the western coast of modern Saudi Arabia. Okay, Nimrod, the son of Cush. Okay, so the text implies that he inherited Cush, which aligns with the location of his kingdom. Okay, if we're saying that they all came down to the region of Shinar, okay, so Nimrod, he lived in Shinar. and that's where his kingdom was. So we can infer from that he probably inherited Cush as king there, okay, as opposed to colonies overseas, right? His name. This is another case where his name is just like, you read it and you're just like, man, this is absolutely crazy. Why? Who names their kid this, right? His name literally translates to "let's rebel," so probably not what his parents called him. I just can't imagine naming my son "Let's Rebel." You know, you are begging for trouble if that's what happens. Okay, so let's assume that it probably was not his name. David Rohl identifies him as the historical, he identifies the historical Nimrod, I should say, as the Sumerian king in Merkar, who is attested to in the Sumerian kings list. Makes a lot of sense, really, in light of the fact that Enmerkar founded the cities that Nimrod is associated with here. So I agree with his identification. We're going to get more into that when we get into chapter 11, though. We're going to talk about the Tower of Babel. So Ashur, who is mentioned immediately after Nimrod, he went on to found Assyria. Okay, Ashur, Assyria. So it's not really hard to see where I'm going with that one, which is in modern day Syria. Okay. Also, they conquered a big area. Okay, now that I've said that, the Assyrians, they were crazy, man. They absolutely were. They conquered this huge area, and then they were just like gone, right? As most empires do. Then it moves on to the descendants of Mizraim. Ludim is the first, which is most people identify it as being a Libyan tribe. There are some who say that it's in Lydia, which is in modern-day Turkey, but I'm of the persuasion that we're talking about a Libyan tribe, which is in Africa, northern Africa, on the Mediterranean coast. Not going to mention any of the famous people from there, but if you're my age, you know exactly who I'm thinking of. Radamim, according to Rabbi Saadia Gaon, they were an Egyptian tribe. There's also the opinion that they were perhaps a Libyan tribe as well, so that's on the western side of Egypt. The Lehavim were, were possibly a Libyan tribe, possibly also an Egyptian tribe. After all, they are the descendants of Mizraim, who is Egypt, right? And just because, again, we're talking about them being the descendants of Mizraim, the descendants of Egypt, it may be that they were colonies that were sent out, or perhaps minor people groups that left and just kind of wandered off on their own and did their own thing for a while. The Naphtuhim were an Egyptian tribe. The Pathrusim were an Egyptian tribe in the north. The Kasluhim were an Egyptian tribe. The Philistines were originally from Kaftor, according to the Torah. There is a rabbinical opinion that they were originally descended from intermarriage between the Pathrusim and the Kasluhim. The two tribes intermarried, created a new tribe, and they just kind of wandered off, did their own thing for a while. They inhabited Kaftor before eventually being either leaving Kaftor of their own free will in sort of an exodus, which is what the text implies, or perhaps they were forced out from Kaftor by the Kaftorim or by somebody else, and they moved to the 5 Philistine cities in modern-day Israel. So we're talking the cities of Ekron, Gaza, Ashdod. I used to have all 5 of these memorized, but now they're just kind of like, meh. Gath. There's one more that I always forget. So I'm going to just allow myself to forget it this time. The Kaftarim, most opinions put them in Crete. Some say possibly also in Cyprus. Okay. Again, these are tribes. These are not necessarily founders of, whole new civilizations. These are tribes as a whole and not individuals necessarily. Canaan, we move on to the descendants of Canaan. His very first son was Sidon, which is the namesake of the city of Sidon in Lebanon. I believe the modern day city of Sidon is, or the city of Sidon, ancient Sidon, is not there in the modern world. I believe that it's just gone. It's ruins. We know where it is, but nobody lives there, from what I understand. But I also understand that there are nearby cities that are seen sort of as a continuation of that. Heth. Okay, so Heth is the ancestor, or the eponymous founder, we'll say, of the Hittite civilization. They were in Israel, they were in Lebanon, and when the Israelites came in, they fled north through Lebanon into modern-day Turkey. Eventually, they actually made up the bulk of the Hittite Empire up there. So that's fun. The Jebusites were the Canaanite tribe that founded the city of Jerusalem. Okay, this is before David. Matter of fact, the text very specifically says that the Jebusites were the tribe that David conquered when he captured the city of Jerusalem. Realistically, it wasn't a big city at the time. We're talking maybe a few thousand. Not a particularly large city. It wasn't held in very high esteem either, at least in the Judges period. The Amorites, they ruled over this huge area of the Levant and Mesopotamia. They had a huge, I don't know if it was a single empire or if it was just like a bunch of like small, states, but this huge region. It has been suggested that Abraham is perhaps sort of an offshoot of the broader Amorite culture. Okay. Ultimately, though, they also lived on the western shore of the Dead Sea and were very likely to be the inhabitants of the cities of the plain. There would be the Pentapolis that was destroyed. Coming up in just a few short chapters, Sodom, Gomorrah, and the other 3 cities. Lost my spot on my notes. The Girgashites. So these guys are an interesting group because we don't really know a whole lot about them. What we do know about them, though, is that they were originally a Canaanite tribe that lived in the land of Canaan. And then when Israel came in, excuse me, we were told to either drive them out or conquer them. And, so when we came in, we offered them, peace. We said, listen, you want to stay here? That's great. You got to change your ways, but, we'll let you do that if you want. And we did do it with at least one tribe. But the Girgashites said, you know what? I'm not going to fight you guys. You scare me. Look what you did to Egypt. Look what you did to Sichon and Og, just across the river. You guys scare me. I'm going to go over here. And according to both rabbinical and historical sources, which I think is just great, the Girgashites migrated to northern Africa, where they ended up forming the Phoenician colony in Carthage. So if you ever wonder where the Carthaginians came from, boom, Girgashites. The Hivites. Okay, so the Hivites lived in the Golan Heights region of modern-day Israel. I realize that's a politically charged statement. I don't care. It's Israel. Okay. You launch a war against us, you lose the war, guess what? Any territory you lose, you lost. Okay? Golan Heights is part of Israel, and I'm lucky enough to live in a country that acknowledges that fact. The Golan Heights and down further south as well, all the way to, from what I understand, all the way to the Kinnereth, that would be the Lake of Galilee. Sea of Galilee. I don't know how you call it in English. It's a lake. Okay. If anybody, so if you happen to be a Christian and you're reading in the New Testament, you read all these fantastic things about the Sea of Galilee. That's what they call it. You read all these fascinating things about the Sea of Galilee. It gives you the impression that it's big, it's huge. No, it's actually really small. It's a small lake, it really is. It's not, you can see across it. I could probably swim across it in less than an hour. It's not that hard. Or it's not that big, I mean. The Hivites of the city of Givon are the only Canaanite tribe that Joshua intentionally allowed to live there, to live among Israel, because they basically surrendered. They said, listen, we'll be your vassals, just don't make war against us. Now, it was deceptive, but Joshua did seal a covenant with them that gave them the right to live there with us. God wasn't too happy about it, but, I mean, not a good thing, but, you can't please everybody, I guess. You're either going to please the people or please God, and Joshua chose the people, I guess. Everyone's got their not so great sides. Okay. The Arkites. So this was a Canaanite tribe that lived in Lebanon. They may still be there. I don't know. The Sinites or Sinites lived in northern Lebanon. The Arwadites. This is the island of Arwad, which is in Syria, and it's still inhabited to this day. So I guess technically, if these are the same people, they're Canaanites. So that's kind of cool. I wonder if they have any traditions that they would probably not like me too much. Armadites. And the Zemarites and the Hamathites, those are the last two that we're getting into this week, are both in modern-day Syria. So, that being said, I am completely done for this week. So, that is the genealogy. These are the peoples that Ham ended up influencing, birthing. Well, I guess he didn't birth anybody, but his wife did, presumably. These are the tribes of people that are Hamitic. Okay, now I'm going to point this out next week as well, but you may have noticed a couple of interesting things about last week and this week. You're going to notice that the overwhelming majority of these tribes are grouped in specific regions. Okay, last week the majority of the tribes were in the Eurasian area. Okay, to the north and north and west of Israel. Today, the descendants of Ham are to the south, far south of Israel, and to the west, southwest of Israel, into Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. Next week, you're going to notice that the Semites, the descendants of Shem, well, they stayed in Asia. So that's cool stuff. Also, you're going to notice that if you put any more study into it, if you don't just take what I tell you, but you do your own study as well, which I encourage you to do, you're going to notice that these are also divided among linguistic groups, and in fact the Torah specifically tells us that, but you're going to notice that the descendants of Yefeth, the majority of them speak Indo-European languages. There are a couple that I'm assuming probably spoke Turkic languages, but it's possible that their descendants now do, but they themselves did not. Okay. You're also going to notice that the groups descended from Ham, the majority of them, not all, but the majority of them, birthed a lot of the African languages that are now called, I don't know if they're called this anymore, but they have been called the Hamitic languages. Next week we're going to see Semitic languages. That would be those descended from Shem, like me. The groups further south in Arabia originally did not speak Arabic. Okay, they had their own language groups, some of which were Semitic, some of which were not. And there are also groups in Africa, like Gez and a number of other Ethiopian languages that are Semitic. That, like I said, there's a lot of influence both ways across that body of water. Okay, it's going to cause linguistic changes and developments. So, that being said, I'm done, man. That's all I got for this week. So until next time, shalom.